In October 2014, Warner Bros. Announced at an investor event its lineup of movies related to DC Comics for the following years, let's say the foundations of what was going to be the extended DC universe. Among their announcements, there were some movies that did take place according to plan, such as Wonder Woman, Suicide Squad and Aquaman, also movies that so far have not seen the light of day like Flash, and movies that we may never see like Cyborg or Green Lantern, at least not in the way they were originally planned. However, one of the announcements that most excited fans was the Justice League movie, one that would have two parts, both directed by Zack Snyder. Unfortunately, things did not go as expected, and the movie that would bring together for the first time the most famous superhero team in comic book history, a film that had a budget of $300 million and was expected to be the hit of the year, simply was not. Instead, the movie was embroiled in a series of problems, such as the fact that Zack Snyder left the filming to deal with a family tragedy, and Joss Whedon, director of films like Avengers, taking his place as director. The question here is, how did we get a second version of a movie that has already been released and was already considered a failure? That's what we're going to analyze today, as the path to the so-called Snydercut, that is, Zack Snyder's version of the Justice League movie, is a difficult one to follow, since what was made known back then when Zack left the recording is something very different from what we know today. That's why today we're going to piece together this puzzle of information around one of the most controversial and divisive superhero movies of all time. The internet is a place full of controversies where it's easy to get lost, but here we organize reliable information and present it to you in an orderly manner so that you are well informed. Today's episode, Zack Snyder's Justice League. If we want to truly understand the Snydercut phenomenon, we first need to know how Zack Snyder, a director who has always been under scrutiny regarding how good his movies really are, came to hold such an important position of power in DC, and the answer has to do with director Christopher Nolan. When Nolan finished directing his The Dark Knight trilogy in 2012, one that was successful both at the box office and with critics, Warner Bros. Offered him the opportunity to be the creative head behind what would be known as the DC Extended Universe. At that time, Marvel was having a lot of success introducing their comic characters to the movies under the command of Kevin Feige, and Warner wanted to recreate something similar with DC characters with Nolan at the helm. However, Nolan had other plans in mind and was not prepared to commit to a universe of movies, but agreed to oversee the Man of Steel movie, which would feature the direction of Zack Snyder, who had achieved some renown among comic fans due to his adaptations of stories like Watchmen and 300, which were more or less faithful to the original material and presented a very particular visual style. Man of Steel was not the massive success that Warner hoped for, but it managed to gross $668 million despite the controversy over the film's ending. This moderate success gave Snyder the opportunity to work on the sequel, Batman vs Superman, one in which Nolan participated as executive producer but had not been creatively involved because he had other projects. This elevated Zack Snyder to the creative leadership role of the extended DC universe, who would oversee in a certain way all these movies that we showed at the beginning of the video. However, Batman vs Superman was released later. The Batman vs Superman movie was said to be 2016's commercial success. Everyone wanted to see Batman face off against Superman for the first time on the big screen, and there were high expectations for the movie. Unfortunately, a few days before the premiere, the reviews of the film were released and they were not at all what Warner had in mind, as most critics presented the movie as slow, joyless, pretentious and meaningless. The box office for the film wasn't that bad, as it managed to gross $872 million, but Warner had higher expectations for a movie that included the three most important characters from DC Comics. Even worse, as the movie created a great division among the fans' opinions, as while some of us liked it a lot, it turns out that others hated it. At this point in the story, Zack was already working on the first part of Justice League, but several of the executives who once supported him, like producer Greg Silverman, lost confidence in him due to the poor reception of Batman vs Superman. Silverman remarks that it was devastating for them. In his words, Zack made these movies like 300, which pleased people. It's our job to please people, and here we had a movie that really didn't do it. This situation led Warner to entrust writer Jeff Jones and then co-production chief John Berg to oversee Snyder at all times during the filming of Justice League. The order was clear. At least one of them always had to be on set with Zack. According to what Berg says, his job was to mediate between what the studio and Zack wanted, but at the same time it was an uncomfortable position as his job was basically to be Snyder's babysitter. Despite this supervision pushing back some of Snyder's ideas, such as Bruce Wayne becoming romantically interested in Lois Lane, he says that he really wasn't bothered much by this intrusion, as they basically just wanted to inject some humor into the film, nothing too outrageous. However, when Kevin Tsuchihara, who was then the chief executive officer of Warner, saw the first cut of the movie, well, this is when things started to get worse. Tsuchihara did not like the tone or the duration of the movie at all. He wanted Justice League to have a more similar approach to what was giving such good results to Marvel, and above all, he wanted the movie to last a maximum of 2 hours. Warner and Snyder seemed to find themselves in a situation where they could not find a middle ground and did not know how to resolve the situation. What happened next was something that no one expected, an event that changed everything. I'm referring to the suicide of Autumn, Zack Snyder's daughter. Autumn was adopted by Zack and his ex-wife Denise when she was just 1 year old. They say she had a great passion for writing and would invent science fiction stories. Of Snyder's 8 children, she was the only one who shared this taste for superheroes with her father and enjoyed seeing them as gods and monsters in epic stories. Unfortunately, Autumn struggled with depression for many years and often wondered what her true worth was or what she was supposed to do with her life. A struggle that ended in March 2017 when she was just 20 years old. Initially, Zack wanted to continue working on Justice League and find some relief through work, as the movie was set to premiere in a few months. But according to what he says, his daughter's death felt like a lightning bolt in the middle of this whole saga, and suddenly the power struggle against Warner and their demands seemed to not matter. In the end, Zack knew it was a fight that required a lot of willpower, something he didn't have at the time, so he decided to abandon the project and focus on his family. Autumn's death was something no one wanted or expected, but the reality is that Warner also saw in this situation the opportunity to separate from Snyder without fully receiving the fans' hatred. So a press release was put together and the story was handled that Warner and Snyder were separating on cordial terms and for completely understandable circumstances. When the original news was given in May of 2017, it was announced that Zack Snyder would retire to accompany his family in their time of mourning, something that is true, but at the same time the narrative was handled that Snyder himself had chosen Joss Whedon to give the final details to the movie. According to what Toby Emmerich, current president of Warner Brothers, originally announced, the direction required is minimal and has to adhere to the style and tone of the template left by Zack. Not only that, but Emmerich also announced that Warner offered Snyder to postpone the movie's release date to give him the opportunity to return to direct it. But he had refused. Remember well the name Toby Emmerich and his great concern for Snyder, because we are going to talk about him later. In short, this original statement from 2017 made us think that Warner was still supporting Snyder's vision, but recent reports have told a different story. As we mentioned, Warner was not happy with the approach being given to the Justice League movie, and that's why Jeff Jones brought Joss Whedon on board, with whom he was collaborating on a script for a Batgirl movie to rewrite some of the scenes. It was Jones who brought him on board, not Zack. Not only that, but Warner was giving more and more power to Whedon, asking him to advise Snyder on some shootings, even letting him direct some scenes. All this before he officially resigned. When Zack definitely left the project, Whedon began to reshoot much of the movie to make it more in line with what Warner asked him, and ended up shooting 3/4 of it, which means that the movie we saw in the theater is much more a product of Whedon than of Snyder. Unfortunately, despite everything, Josh was not the savior that Warner hoped for and presented us with a movie that feels rushed, incoherent, despite having a very simple story and above all mediocre as it lacks identity. It doesn't come close to the classic heroism that Whedon presented us in films like Avengers, nor to this dark style that characterizes Snyder. It was a movie that intended to please everyone, but almost no one remembers as something pleasant to watch, to the extent that Christopher Nolan and Deborah Snyder had to ask Zack to please not watch the movie. In fact, a Warner executive said in an interview anonymously that we were stunned when we saw what Josh did. The rooftop thief was ridiculous and horrible, the Russian family pointless and nonsensical. And we all knew what it was, and it was uncomfortable because no one wanted to admit the piece of shit that it was, despite the fact that this tape, for some reason that escapes my understanding, received better reviews than Batman vs Superman. The truth is that many people were also disappointed with the result. And here is where the cult towards the so-called Snydercut begins. Because Toby Emmerich initially handled the story that Zack Snyder's Justice League movie was almost complete, the public began to ask for this version to be presented, something they called Snydercut. It should be clarified here that at this point no one had proof that this version existed, but Emmerich's statements fueled this movement. Remember Toby Emmerich as he reappears later in the story. Over the following months, the hashtag Release the Snyder Cut was gaining more and more strength to such a degree that in June of 2019, several fans paid $1,170 to rent a small plane that flew over the San Diego Comic-Con with a sign that displayed this text. Later in October of the same year, they rented a billboard in Times Square where we could also see a message of support for the Snyder Cut. Not only that, but those same fans who rented the billboard began to raise funds for suicide prevention organizations through personal donations and merchandise sales. To date, these fans have raised over $500,000 and managed to get companies like Subway to join the movement by donating food to people in homeless situations. However, not all fans are alike. There is a part of the so-called Snyder Leavers, which is a derogatory term to refer to fans of Zack Snyder, that has proven to be extremely violent. This other group of fans has dedicated themselves to massively attacking through comments on social media anyone who speaks negatively of Zack Snyder or his work. It doesn't matter if it's a review or a personal opinion, and many content creators will tell you that it's one of the most intense fandoms out there. These people often share the belief that there is a conspiracy orchestrated by Disney and sites like Rotten Tomatoes that deliberately and systematically attack Snyder's work, although the reality is that Warner Bros. Owns a part of Rotten Tomatoes, and it's most likely that critics simply don't like his directing style. On the other hand, the fact that this radical line of pro-Snyder fans exists caused the anti-Snyder to become increasingly intense and extreme in their comments, claiming that anyone who wants to see the Snyder Cut is from this line of violent fans, despite the donations others have made to social causes. Not only that, but these anti-Snyder also downplayed Ray Fisher's statements when he reported abuses on the set by Joss Whedon, arguing that it was just publicity for the Snyder Cut. It should be clarified that recently Gal Gadot and much of the cast of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a series directed by Whedon, have made similar statements to those of Fisher, which tells us that they were probably true. On the other hand, ironically, some of the most radical fans in favor of Snyder, like some Facebook pages that I prefer not to name, have defended Fisher, even though in other posts they complain about all inclusion of Afro-descendant characters and defend workplace harassment. As you see, reducing fans to simply two sides, the anti-Snyder and the pro-Snyder, is unrealistic. As you see, reducing fans to simply two sides, the anti-Snyder and the pro-Snyder, is unrealistic. Since within both currents there have been deplorable behaviors and also simply fans who are eager or not eager to see the movie. Let's say that the path to the Snyder Cut is one where genuine love for wanting to see a product is mixed with excessive passion demonstrated in a toxic and violent way. The Snyder Cut trend reached new heights when Jason Momoa and others joined in. Throughout all of 2019, many web pages and internet sites talked about the Snyder Cut as if it were the Loch Ness Monster, where many claimed they knew someone who had seen this cut, while others said it was something that simply did not exist. However, everything changed on November 1st of the same year when actor Jason Momoa, who played Aquaman, said in an interview for music television, "I've seen it, I've seen the Snyder Cut. I think the public needs to see it." In the same interview, the actor himself mentioned that this cut felt radically different from Whedon's version. These statements from Momoa changed everything, as they seemed to be a reliable and first-hand source confirming the existence of the Snyder Cut. A few days later, Zack Snyder posted some images of Henry Cavill as Superman on his Vero account, one of which said he still has to rise. And 2 days later, Gal Gadot and Ben Affleck posted tweets supporting the release of the Snyder Cut. This caught the attention of Warner executives, who for the first time considered the possibility of making the Snyder Cut a reality, although not in the way we might think. Here, we need to make a very important clarification. In those days when we fans heard something related to the Snyder Cut, we imagined a nearly complete movie. But the reality is that the cut Zack had was a version designed to show to the studio executives, where many parts still lacked music or were missing special effects, to the point that in some scenes Ray Fisher could still be seen in his motion capture suit. It was a cut made for Warner to get an idea of how the movie was coming along, but it was not yet a product to be shown to the public. This is when we return to Toby Emmerich. That same November, Toby Emmerich called Zack Snyder and told him that he felt bad that he hadn't been able to finish the movie as he had in mind. He proposed premiering his movie on Warner's new platform, Home Box Office Max. However, Emmerich's intention was to release the raw cut just as Zack Snyder had it on his computer. So Zack flatly refused and told them he didn't trust the studio's intentions. He also told them why. In his words, "I'll tell you why. 3 reasons. 1, you managed to get the internet off your back, which is probably your biggest motivation to do this. 2, you redeem yourselves by doing things right, I guess on some level. And 3, you get a crappy version of the movie that you can point to and say, fortunately, after negotiating, the studio and Zack came to an agreement, and say that you were always right." Fortunately, after negotiating, the studio and Zack came to an agreement, and the studio agreed to finance the rest of his movie, which was not revealed until May 2020. Initially, media outlets like The Wrap reported that Zack had been given $20 million as a budget to put the finishing touches on the movie. It was also reported that the studio was very firm in telling him that they would not allow him to reshoot scenes. However, a couple of months later, it was announced that the budget had increased to $70 million. To put this in context, it's half the total budget of movies like Iron Man and Captain America 1. This budget would allow for a week of filming with several members of the original cast, including Ben Affleck returning to the role of Batman, and a completely new scene featuring Jared Leto returning to the role of Joker. The movie now lasts 4 hours, which is at least 1 hour more than what Snyder originally planned in 2017, and this time he has full creative control of the project, something he was able to negotiate because he is not receiving any salary for this work. To put it in context, Joss Whedon received $25 million for the reshoots of Justice League. I think to get to this point of giving up your salary, we all realize that this is a project that he is very eager to do. Something that is seen as stubbornness by some and persistence by others. The question is why? Why does Zack Snyder seem determined to want to finish this movie? The answer also has to do with his daughter Autumn. Zack now treats this film as a very personal project that he dedicates to his daughter Autumn, the only one in his family with whom he shared this taste for superheroes. In fact, the choice of Leonard Cohen's song Hallelujah for the trailer is because it was his daughter's favorite song, and at the end of the film we will be able to hear it in the voice of the singer Alison Krauss, who also sang it live at Autumn's funeral. Zack then seems to be seeking a kind of catharsis through his work. In fact, he himself said if he were a potter, he would make some piece of pottery. I'm a filmmaker, so they get this giant movie. We all know that Zack visually has a lot of talents, but narratively he also has a lot of limitations. However, we can't deny that he truly loves these characters as he sees various aspects of his life reflected in them in some way. He has said that he is particularly drawn to the story of Kal-El, an alien who was adopted by an earthly couple and who ended up becoming the greatest superhero of all because he has adopted 4 children of his own. And if this is true, perhaps he also sees part of his current pain reflected in Darkseid's anti-life equation, the mathematical proof that we must succumb to despair. At this point, I am very glad not to be a channel dedicated to doing reviews, as I am sure that after knowing the whole story behind the Snyder Cut, I don't think I can watch this movie objectively. I don't think I can listen to Hallelujah and read the final phrase of the movie that says "for autumn" without these personal emotions affecting my judgment, but at this point, what does it matter? Also, do you think anyone can do it? We've been forming a preconceived opinion of what this movie should be for over 3 years, and I find it very difficult that anyone at this point is going to change their mind after seeing the result, for better or worse, but I suppose it's something we have to deal with, and all we can do is try to enjoy the movie we've been asking for 3 years. In the end, there doesn't seem to be a future beyond this movie. Whether it's good or bad, it's most likely that Zack Snyder's Justice League will be the last remnant of this stage of the DC Extended Universe with Snyder in charge, which seems to me like a win-win, since those who didn't enjoy this style can rest easy knowing that the future of DC will look different, while those of us who did enjoy it will finally be able to see the movie we wanted to see with everything that entails. And for Snyder, the goal seems to be a bit more personal. He says that Autumn often wrote the following phrase: "We all die. The goal is not to live forever. The goal is to create something that does." And as Zack says, maybe this will help, maybe this movie will help a little.